welcome to our first online fundraiser of Patricia Locke Foundation today. We are conducting our fundraiser on our Facebook page. Please be sure to visit our Facebook page throughout the day today and view our educational video series. We will be having multiple videos posted here by our both by our creative director and president, Kevin Locke, whom I will be making this video with today, right now, but also by our other board members. Please come and meet our board members who will be popping up in this Facebook page throughout the day. And we will be launching our new website. Please follow the link, click on the link to our new Patricia Locke Foundation website, visit our website, peruse through it, look at our vision, mission, principles, and who we are and what we do and our current projects. We will have a special page on our website for merchandise today. They are all auction priced and flat rate auction priced items, including books, handouts and flyers and posters of digital art by Kevin Locke. This will be an original, first time ever opportunity to own Kevin Locke art. And then we will even have some star quilts. We will have opportunity to contribute to our current projects, which include K through 12 character education, Indigenous flute revitalization and curriculum development, a school garden project that we're very excited about, providing organic produce in Indigenous schools. And last but not least is to support our educational mission. The Patricia Locke Foundation is established on the legacy of its matriarch, Patricia Locke. Her Lakota name is Tawacha Washtawi, compassionate woman whose life's work centered on the promotion and preservation of Indigenous traditional knowledge and wisdom for the benefit and empowerment of all people. So the vision statement of the Patricia Locke Foundation incorporates a lifelong dedication to actively respect, protect, and defend the rights of the people and the planet, which brings us to this topic of this video today, which is very near and dear to our hearts. Kevin, the importance of land-based rural indigenous communities in the protection of the home planet Earth is something that cannot escape our attention. It seems that the indigenous populations and communities in North America have something unique, a guiding principle or a vision or a vantage point that is very unique compared to EuroAmerican mainstream society, which is increasingly becoming important for the protection of our future existence on this planet. So what can you say about this indigenous principle and guiding principles and vision points? What are the unique aspects of them?
The unique aspect is again based upon the teachings of the indigenous messengers of God, which we've been emphasizing throughout these videos. And it's a stewardship relationship which has been enjoined upon the people. And I think much of this relationship can be summarized by a principle that everything in the world is a physical manifestation of a spiritual reality. So that everything that we can experience with our senses in this world, this physical world, is a counterpart to something in the spiritual worlds. Of course, the spiritual worlds are beyond our comprehension, beyond our ken, but yet using this principle, we can study the handiwork of the Creator in this physical world, and by extension apply that to overarching spiritual principles. So I think this was probably misunderstood by the immigrant population when they arrived here, and they falsely accused the people of worshiping nature. Like they say, oh, those people are heathen, they're savage, they're worshiping that tree, or they're worshiping that mountain or that ocean or that eagle. But when in reality, all of these different physical objects, they're imbued with spirit in that they represent a divine attribute. So in other words, the indigenous person will look at that mountain and see that it's a overpowering, mighty, awesome mountain, but it represents also divine qualities of majesty and grandeur. Or they look at the ocean and they see that the ocean embodies spiritual principles of maybe limitlessness. Or they see the eagle soaring and they see that eagle represents nobility, or maybe the ascendancy of the human spirit, and so on and so forth. And these one of the provisions of this covenant left by these indigenous messengers is embedded in the language. So the languages are also very expressive in this in describing the physical world and the properties thereof because of that relationship with the spiritual worlds.
So for the Indian, all creation was alive and interconnected, and that guiding principle came from what?
Well, that principle comes from these indigenous messengers that all of creation is a portal to the spiritual worlds beyond. So everything is in effect living. Everything is imbued with spirit. Everything is manifest, powerful.
Can you compare and contrast it to, say, the Euro-American view, maybe common mainstream view of the mountain and the rock and the tree?
Well, I think by the time immigrant populations reached these shores on this land, there was such a imbalance of power in Europe. There's everything was controlled by these aristocracies, autocratic rulers who were just bent on usurping resources and people and everything to amass wealth. So everything in the creation of especially people were exploitable in order to serve a self-aggrandizing purpose.
So when we have that point of view, that being Euro-American point of view of everything is consumable, usurpable, and it's dead, basically, open for possession, it leads to a certain kind of self-harm. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, of course. If everything is viewed as lacking in spirit or as dead, then one would tend to just exploit that to its maximum. But now we can see the consequences of those beliefs, of the underlying, that there's no foundation to those beliefs.
So when these two worlds collided, the indigenous and the Euro-Americans, when the immigrants came here and they met, how did they view everything? What was the protocol with the indigenous, and what was the protocol with the, or maybe the lack of with the Euro-Americans?
Well, as borne out by the historical documents, when the indigenous people encountered the immigrant population, there was always a consultation that took place. And according to the protocols of the indigenous people here, based on the teachings of the messengers, they would always invoke the covenant. So the first thing they do is they'd always kindle a fire, and that fire symbolizes, they're emblematic of the covenant, that living connection between heaven and earth. And so that as long as that fire is burning, it represents the presence of God. It symbolizes that. It's just symbolic. And so then before the deliberations take place, why then these indigenous people would always go through the verbal recitation of the provisions of the covenant, the stewardship relationship that we have, and how our consultation will affect not only how the results of the consultation will affect not only the current generations and the young people, but also the unborn going into the future, and also how it affects all of creation. And then invariably, at some point in those consultations, it's at the beginning or midway or maybe at the end, depending on the people that's hosting, they would use tobacco. Of course, tobacco we know is probably the most addictive natural occurring substance in the world, in creation. And so it's very powerful, but it's always been a very controlled substance here. Of course, it's prior to 1492, tobacco was unknown outside of the Western Hemisphere, but it's very proscribed. Use is part of this protocol because that tobacco represents the covenant also. It's always used whenever somebody wants to get medicine or anything, they always put that tobacco down, and because it symbolizes the relationship again. And so then when that tobacco is put down on the embers of the fire, the coals of that fire, and then that aroma or that smoke wafts upward, then it's dispersed out to the four directions. And they say that that's announcing to creation that covenant is being invoked. And so they say when the Creator above detects that fragrance coming up, it's well-pleasing. It's well-pleasing because then and that way that those prayers and that consultation will be blessed.
So the decisions were always this way connected to the whole entire creation?
Yes.
That was the purpose?
Yeah, that's the purpose of using that tobacco, yes.
What did the Euro-Americans do with the tobacco?
Well, I think early on it was these addictive properties were seen, or they were, and so then it was exploited. Tobacco was exploited and marketed throughout the world. So the result we see is that something which was initially very good and holy and powerful was that the meaning was extracted out of it, and it was just used to hook people on it. And so this is also part of the prophecy, is that this thing, in other words, tobacco, which was initially meant to be good and powerful, but eventually the teachings would be tossed to the side, and the result would be a great harm and destruction and death. And so there's a prophecy attached to that, and that would be the sign for the renewal of the covenant.
Oh, wow. So you just explained how the viewpoint of the Euro-American, so to speak, the immigrant, who's lacking this vital piece about united nature and interconnected nature of the whole creation, that was part of the covenant given to indigenous peoples, could actually lead to a great self-harm. For example, the example of the tobacco you mentioned, how
Yes.
this was the way they invoked the covenant for indigenous people, that was exploited and taken out of its, into a material realm, out of its spiritual implication, was stripped of it, then it became a source of self-harm. So that is a really example of the difference between everything being alive in the view of the Indian people and everything like the rock and tree being dead and easily exploitable in the view of the Euro-American immigrant population, how that leads to a very different place in terms of self-harm versus protection of the community. So that's a great example. So my question is, last question, and that's probably in the heart of everyone, is how do we break through where we are right now with our current mainstream and dominant point of views, which are self-harming, stepping away from the covenant, self-harming, and geared towards self-edification and profit and possession of usurping resources and possessing. How do we get out of that, and what is the future hold?
Well, we can see that prevailing view that we see, the materialistic view, is much like the winter. We can describe that like winter. It's very dead. It's everything is in a dormant state. It's encrusted with ice and dark. But we know, we have faith that this divine springtime is inevitable. It can't be prevented. And so then the only response to that is to align ourselves with the forces of integration, the forces that will bring about this blossoming and efflorescence. And we can hear that those forces are gaining in strength, and that voice is rising up all over the world. The voice which is summoning us to become aware of how our actions affect the planet itself. We can see the pervasive environmental degradation, how we need to attune ourselves to the well-being of children, health, the equality of women, to rot out all this corruption and this the inequity, the disparity between wealth and poverty. And there were all these things, and we can see this rising voice coming up to shake us up and get us out of that hibernation and slumber.
So you're gonna offer a prayer on this?
Yes. Kashila wa mayang kayo le mi echa te kiana wa shiero re unchi maka na we chi jinaya wa wa wala kuwa wa uero and that says, grandfather, look at me. See that I have taken a difficult stance in this life. See that I have dedicated myself to stand up and to protect our grandmother, the earth. See that I pledge myself to treat her with kindness and gentility.
Oh.